Seattle, Washington, August 2013. In a moment I'll be setting off to walk across the American West, from here to El Paso, Texas. The history books say America got a handle on the West by crossing it, from Lewis and Clark and the pioneers on down. So I'm curious how the country looks crossing it now. I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, one step at a time, but I'm also curious how the country looks to Westerners who move people, goods, and information for a living. They do the work that lets other people skip over the West's deserts and mountains without thinking about it, let alone breaking a sweat. I want to find out what this means for local communities. These days, most of the West is flyover country. Fiber optics cross the West 144 million times faster than someone walking. If you're not the one doing the groundwork, technology can make the world seem increasingly small. That's the whole point. My guess is, though, you step outside and tackle the place yourself, the West gets big again fast. I'd figured the whole first month would be one long shakedown period. Reaching the Columbia River on day 14 felt like a milestone. I'd gotten far enough to feel like I was starting to get into the swing of things. I'd also reached a landmark in the history of people crossing the West, because the port of Pasco has one of the oldest airports in the United States.
The airport originated in 1926, and that was when Varney Airlines began, which later became United Airlines. So their purpose in life was to transfer U.S. mail from Pasco to Elko, Nevada through Boise. In recent years, outlying airports have probably lost service. So we have grown, smaller cities have lost service or minimized service.
The other thing is that we do have, and I don't know how familiar you are with the other parts of the economy here, but there's a large U.S. federal government facility operated by the Department of Energy called Hanford. The plutonium that went into the bomb that was detonated in Nagasaki was generated at the Hanford site. Over the years, and now that's into, okay, clean up all of that. So there's a significant investment by the federal government and a significant, for lack of a better term, anchor industry.
When the airport opened in the 20s, they used to bring the mail up in a horse-drawn stagecoach. 17 years later, they were building atomic bombs. Hanford went on to produce the plutonium for tens of thousands of atomic weapons over the next 4 decades. Pasco isn't unusual among Western towns in its dependence on a nearby military installation. It is unusual in that 4 decades of radioactive leaks made the northern slopes of those hills in the distance one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Radioactive waste is still leaching into the Columbia just upstream from Pasco. All the while, transportation on the river has helped to keep the town an attractive place to live and do business just the same. Until recently, that is.
What's occurred with time is, and again, because of efficiencies of deep water ocean-going vessels, and those are very, very thin margins that they live on. They need bigger and bigger ships to go to fewer and fewer ports, and they pass on any inefficiencies to the inland freight. What that means is that Portland has had a downturn in the number of deep water vessels, and the vessels they're losing is the direct service to Japan. In the short term, at least, it's economically not viable. Public ownership of transportation assets, there's a bottom line driven reason for that. It's because a lot of them, they don't make money, they don't pay for themselves.
What have you seen just over the course of your life with the way phones and people using them have changed around here?
The norm when I started was a 4-party line and a 2-party line. I can remember advising people to put in for a 2-party line because the chances are you would be the only person on line. So if you wanted to use a phone, you'd pick it up and listen, see if somebody's talking on it. If they were, you'd hang up and wait.
If you were...
If you're curious, you'll kind of figure out what they were talking about. You know, and as we morphed away from 4-party lines to private lines, which was legislatively mandated, then you needed more copper in the field, more wires. The problem through that time then was for the phone companies to have enough capacity for the local. You know, it used to be, way back when, that the big money maker was all the long distance. The long distance actually took care of what they lost in the local market.
And the local market was losing.
Yeah, yes. I don't think the local market ever did make a great deal of money. But the long distance, that's what they craved. And then, you know, and that's now morphed into the wireless. Because it takes us so much less people to maintain the wireless network. Problems change, but you know, the end result is they're doing more with less people. And when I left, they were talking about, you know, like mega offices. Instead of having, you know, one in each town, then those sites would just kind of be remote switching centers a little bit, and all the office functions would happen like in one place, which is going to make it a lot easier for that junior high kid in China to foul it all up with his computer.
No.
You know, you morph from small to bigger to bigger to bigger to bigger to be economically feasible. You know, we weren't, still aren't, a long ways from Seattle, but those folks didn't come out too much.
Yeah.
Especially rural areas. Down in Imnaha, which is out of Wallowa County, it's pretty isolated. You know, talking about cell phones, it was all line of sight. Imnaha's down in the canyon. There was one payphone outside the Imnaha store and tavern, and you know, they had a lot of hunter people, and the hunters would use that. Well, that there wasn't enough in-box revenue to justify keeping that phone, so they took it out. Well, and poor folks in Imnaha, you thought we'd have shot them in the foot, because now there wasn't any place for the non-locals to use the phone, and they'd knock on doors and stuff. So that was
My left knee had been feeling bad since before the trip even started. The day I reached the Snake River, I started to suspect it was a cartilage tear. Cartilage damage in the knee is typically permanent and potentially crippling. What would you do? That night I camped in the brush next to a party of fishing buddies who warned me about the bears. They said, "If a bear bothers you, just scream. We've got plenty of guns."
And we got a bear.
On September 8th, I saw the Rocky Mountains for the first time. I stayed with a lonely cowboy trying online dating in middle age. I met a hat maker living in an old abandoned schoolhouse who's interested in bacteria. She said, "I don't see how we can think of ourselves as autonomous beings when each of us is such a complicated community." The central Idaho Rockies are one of the biggest roadless areas in the United States. In the winter, it gets as cold here as Antarctica.
My name is Deb Bitten, and my husband Jeff and I own and operate a horse packing operation in the Sawtooth Wilderness. We are probably the biggest horse outfitters in the state of Idaho. We do everything from as short as an hour, because people want that experience to be able to say, yes, I've been on a horse, and some for the very first time. We've done as long as 16 days and moved from one end to the wilderness to the other. But primarily those horses are used for short rides. Our backcountry use is way down because our society is so urban, so plugged in, if you will. That they don't know how to sleep in a sleeping bag. They don't want to be without their cell phone. They don't know how to poo in the woods, and they don't really want to poo in the woods. I had a woman that hiked out about 4 or 5 years ago, a woman that was in her 40s, and she'd never been in that much darkness, and that terrified her.
So she hiked out.
She hiked out, she stayed up all night, and she hiked out the next morning. People have become pretty cushy. Stanley's kind of a place that you either love it or you hate it. Because it's everything you wanted. It's Mecca or it's hell. You know, I have a client that's done 12 trips with us. She went on a pack trip when she was in her teens. And the outfitter was this rugged cowboy kind of thing. And she never forgot that pack trip. She married, she had 2 or 3 kids. She ultimately divorced her husband, came back, actually stole the outfitter away from his wife, and outfitted with this man for about 20 years. She's 85. We take her and her family. She's got like 13 in her family. She pays for them to come every time. For me, this is my office.
Yeah.
You know, and what kind of a sweet gig is that?
All in all, it is a little bit wretched. And if the temperature drops low tonight, I'm probably going to wake up to find my shoes frozen solid. It's always kind of a strange thing to see a solitary animal that's gotten through around the fence somehow and is out on the road. And they go up and down the road and seem to find the situation kind of anxious. It seems like they've gotten out only to realize that the other side of the fence is a lot less spacious than the side that they were penned in. It's going to get a bit heavy.
There are some rough-looking towns in the west. Boarded-up windows, rotting deer in the streets. I saw a cat with its head run over in someone's driveway.
I think it was Washington that was notable for the amount of metal bits on the roadside, of metal parts. Idaho is notable for legs. There are lots of severed legs on the roadside here.
My host in Darlington once drove Lady Gaga to a wedding. The Idaho National Laboratory is another of the great secret military sites of the West, up there with Hanford, Los Alamos, and Area 51. There was a fatal reactor meltdown here in the 60s, and the desert's still littered with ordnance from the Second World War. All things considered, the oddest thing about this place today might be that there's a public road through it at all.
My name's Steve Cannon. I am a meteorologist with KIDK TV3 and KIFI Local News 8. I've traveled all over the United States. I've been to a good section of the world. And at all that time, I've never found anybody or anywhere I like more than here.
Is it pretty common for the people who work here to been long-time residents?
No. Oh, no. An awful lot of people will get experience in college, and then they'll come to this station or even a smaller market, and generally speaking, we'll have them for 2 years, and then they'll go to a larger market with the end goal in mind. Obviously, everybody wants to end up in either New York or Los Angeles. I'm the exception because this is my home. My great-grandfather homesteaded near Rexburg, which is about 20 miles north, 2 years after George Custer found out he was not invincible. 1878, we've been here ever since. We still operate kind of by the code of the West out here. You know, the old John Wayne, life is hard. It's harder when you're stupid. Sometimes we are not as generous with newcomers. This chap was talking about, oh, I can't stand Idaho. It is so provincial. It is so backward. It is so behind. And finally, I looked at him and I said, well, if it's so bad, why are you here? You know, one of the most beautiful things in the world is somebody who's always griping about the area turning south and driving back.
If you need any hail, I've got extra. I could lend you some.
I know you're not supposed to change horses in midstream, But the fact of the matter is, if it's got axles and bearings and tires, it ain't a horse.
Alpine, Wyoming. This is the Wild West. It's the first town that I've gone through where attached to the gas station is a gun shop. Alpine Standard, it can do your AR-15s and AK-47s. And I checked out their webpage earlier because I was trying to see if they might be able to sell me a deer cart before I found my bike trailer. And they have a picture of a .50 caliber machine gun.
A sheriff pulled me over in response to calls about a strange person on the side of the road. He let me go because I wasn't trying to catch a ride. People offered me rides. People gave me their food. One man offered me a job fixing car windshields. People gave me shelter. I stayed with an engineer whose favorite authors included Steinbeck, Dumas, and Dickens. He said he had books instead of hunting trophies, but the idea was the same. People prayed over me. My girlfriend got a job in Scotland. People warned me about wolves in the mountains and were surprised I didn't have a gun. I crossed the old fur trapping ranges on dirt roads buried under snow and ice, spending hours one night struggling to keep the cart from pulling me away, laboring down into a dark white well. That night I lost all feeling in my toes and did crunches in my sleeping bag until I woke to find it was morning. Hey, my love. I just got home. I think we could be happy there. You don't seem to be online. Good luck with the repairs. Speak soon. I love you. I wish you were here, with me. She wanted to see me at Christmas and meet my family, get married, settle on a small farm, start a family, and commute to work in the city while I looked after the animals and the children. She wanted to buy a plane ticket that night.
This trip is starting to get genuinely difficult. Goat's heads. Eight years ago, I went to a poetry reading by Jack Gilbert. One of the poems he read was about Icarus and divorce. And the culmination of the poem was, I believe that Icarus was not failing as he fell, but merely coming to the end of his triumph. We've come to this strange place where we celebrate our breaking points. I've had a tendency over the course of this trip to fight problems with stuff rather than with behavior. If I'm cold, I try to find something that will make me less cold. If I'm having a hard time pushing the cart, I try to find something that will make the cart easier to push. Heck, even getting the cart was a thing that I got to try to make it easier to carry the weight of the water I thought I would need to get across the American West. This is in pretty stark contrast to how I've behaved on a lot of other trips, when I've usually tried to work my way out of problems by adopting a different frame of mind. And just gritting my teeth a little, or not gritting my teeth, whatever it is, changing the way I was acting, the way I was thinking, rather than changing the tools I was carrying, the stuff I was hauling. And the result of my attempts over the past 1,400 miles to solve my problems with stuff is that I'm now pushing a 3-foot wide bicycle trailer up the side of a road without a shoulder on the side of a mountain in Utah. I can't get this thing through doors. I can't carry it on my back. It keeps getting flats. I'm not exactly happier. It's not even letting me travel much faster. With a backpack over a multiple 1,000-mile trip, I've averaged 15 miles a day, including the days that I need to take off to rest because of the toll that kind of travel takes on the body. With the cart, my wonderful labor-saving, speed-increasing cart, so far I've been averaging 18 miles a day. The cart is winning me 3 extra miles a day. That's 1 hour of walking. And I certainly can't tell that it's making me any safer, happier, wiser, or stronger.
I have no idea what I'm eating right now. I know it's a muffin, but I also know that it's bright green and I feel like it shouldn't be.
The stretch of highway that I'm walking on right now, I think points out pretty well the difference between the idea of the American West as a place of wide open spaces and what you actually feel when you're traveling through it the way I'm traveling. Where I'm walking and where all these cars and trucks are driving, you get a marvelously strong impression of civilization. What with the roadway itself and the cordage that's strung out along the side of the roadway down in the grass, and the trash, like the beer bottles, or all the broken pieces of tire treads that are strewn out in the gravel just to the side of the roadway. And then there's the barbed wire fence that runs almost without interruption the entire length of the roadway and prevents someone like me from actually getting out into any of that wide open space. So yes, it's big. Yes, the sun is bright. Yes, the air is clear at night and the stars are extraordinary to see. But this is not a wilderness. Seen from the road, the whole landscape is an extension of the road.
The American West lies roughly at the same latitude and elevation as Central and Southwest Asia. It has roughly the same climate and population density. It has a similar history of nomadism, trade, empire, religious fanaticism, and war. Throughout much of the West, American flags seem not to indicate support for the federal United States so much as enthusiasm for the military, and especially for its ongoing wars in Southwest Asia. The U.S. military trains for Iraq and Afghanistan in these parts of the United States in part because they're so similar. A city planner in Seattle told me that as people cross the West over time, and as the technology of globalization advances, the big places grow and the small places wither. The country between cities grows brittle and breaks. When Zuckerberg started Facebook, he told his employees to move fast and break things. It was more important to get things done fast than to do them safe or clean or right. Over the years, as the chickens started coming home to roost, even while the company flourished, Zuckerberg found Facebook was spending so much time and energy compensating for its earlier freewheeling chaos that it was worth slowing down to be careful going forward. It's no accident that Facebook is from the American West, along with Apple, Uber, Amazon, and Microsoft. It's no accident that move fast and break things sounds like the briefing for a commando raid. It's no accident that the word pioneer originally meant foot soldier. Soldiers hate getting bogged down. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the accusation that seemed to needle the U.S. military most was that it had bogged down trying to change from a strike force into an army of occupation. You can't move fast and break things if you're the government. You don't move fast and break things in your own home. America won the West in the 19th and 20th centuries by moving fast and breaking things. Like Powell said on his way to Iraq, if you break it, you own it. Militarily, you break a nation in order to own it, like a pioneer breaks ground as a homesteader. Now it's the 21st century. America owns the West now, but it's still moving fast and breaking things. Sometimes moving fast is hard, but breaking things is easy. Sometimes breaking things is hard, so we break ourselves. I worry there's a crash cult, if we're not sure what success would be, but we know failure proves we tried.
This area was a heavy area for uranium. And the United States, following the development of the atomic bomb and a small growth of a nuclear power industry in the 1950s, was spending a lot of time looking for uranium. But uranium market began fading, especially following the 3 Mile Island accident in the mid-1970s in Pennsylvania, where suddenly the future of nuclear power was not nearly as bright as it had been before that. So the mill closed down, the mines closed down, the town emptied out. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families had to leave. People abandoned homes, things like that. At the same time, beginning around 1970, we saw the development following the 1960s of a kind of an urban move among more eccentric type of back-to-the-land types. And Moab was one of the places that attracted some of those people. It had wide open spaces, it had very inexpensive housing. And so we attracted a growing, you'd call it a countercultural community. The main split up until the 1980s was uranium miners and industrial types versus the counterculturalists who were here and had a much more of an environmental ethic to the land. But they were both kind of small and they kind of coexisted to a certain degree. What changed things was the significant growth of visitation at the local national parks throughout the West. People traveling long distances to get to them. And also a lot of people who set up kind of a circuit where they fly into Las Vegas and drive to 7 or 8 national parks and then return to Las Vegas 2 weeks later. We attracted a lot of recreation-oriented people who wanted to live a lifestyle based on their activities, not on their work. And the difference is if you work in a power plant, you're making $30 an hour, and if you work at a bike shop, you're making $10 an hour. You know, $14,000 or $15,000 a year is the difference between buying a home or sending a kid to college. Or
what is the year-round population?
The year-round population of the city of Moab is around 5,000 people.
Peak influx adds what to that?
On weekends we'll have 10,000 or 15,000 people coming in. and in the winter things close down significantly. It creates a problem with police, for example. Normally you need 3 or 4 police, but on weekends you need 10 or 12. Well, what do you do with those 8 cops? Until now, we've always had a pretty good supply of fresh water coming from the LaSalle Mountains. As things get drier, and they have been getting drier, and there's reason to believe it could get drier in the future, we don't know how much rainfall we'll have or how much snowfall we'll have in the future. It will end up costing us more in the future to meet the needs of people who don't live here. It's kind of ironic that we have a town where much of the recreation is supported by people who have a strong environmental ethic. But one of the ways they promote that environmental ethic is encouraging people from Europe to get on planes and fly here and rent cars. But the real impact of that type of economy is on the people who live here. You can work very hard in the spring and fall, but maybe you're not needed on Tuesday or Wednesday in the spring because the crowds are down. And you're certainly not needed in January or early February or even in December in some cases. So you develop a workforce that is not secure.
Well, last night was memorable. By the time I got everything into the tent, my hands were numb, my feet were numb. I was cursing like a sailor, loudly.
I reached Monticello in the dark in the middle of a storm. I was facing the wind, and the ice hitting my face made it hard to keep my eyes open. The cart's tires were falling apart. I lost control of my heart rate and my body temperature, and everything around me was moving unnaturally fast. Finally, I found a motel, got a room, pulled the cart in behind me, and fell asleep. For a day, I was barely functional. Then I got an email from the friend whose encouragement had been my main source of hope for the past 1,000 miles. Owen, I think I need to take a bit of distance and fall out of touch for some time. I'm dealing with a large amount of uncertainty in my life at the moment. Career-wise, money-wise. These are big pressures on me which I would like to solve sooner rather than later. My friendship with you is creating another big center of uncertainty. I don't know where it is going, and there's no way of figuring that out while you're on your walk on the other side of the continent. I need my energy to go to solving the first uncertainty. So I apologize in advance for disappearing a bit. It won't be forever.
Thanksgiving Day. Just got out of the homeless shelter. I was thinking it's been exactly a year now since I had a place of my own.
Durango. My girlfriend and I broke up. My host in town laughed at me when I mentioned it. Me being me, I went for a walk to clear my head. I still had more than 200 miles to walk over 7,000 feet, and it was only getting colder. Keeping water liquid was suddenly a pressing problem. I'd need a thermos, better gloves, something warmer at night, more money. If I stopped walking now, I had nothing. I picked myself up from the mud to find that my knee still worked, which pretty much confirmed that I was dealing with torn cartilage, and had been all along. Permanent injury. In the long run, a broken leg would have been better. Back at the house, my host cornered me in the kitchen and told me I'd been a bad guest. She said I was aloof, ungrateful, and ungracious, and that I needed to show more humility. Then she asked why I wasn't standing up straight. I told her I was feeling down.
My name is Jeffrey Gavlinski. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for Skyworks Industries. Skyworks was formed in 2003, and since 2003 we've been a microwave-based broadband service provider, internet service provider in Southwest Colorado. You know, we have really good infrastructure here in the core part of town, but as soon as you start to go outside of town, all that breaks down.
Yeah.
Think about this for a second. If you're in a place that is really dependent, you're in a community that is dependent on tourism, and you don't have a redundant broadband in your community, and fiber gets cut. Typically, a fiber cut can take anywhere from 4 to 12 hours to fix. If your internet goes dark, well, then you can't process credit cards. The impact economically is tremendous. Somewhere near Steamboat Springs, I think they lost close to $1 million in an 8 or 9 hour period. And then, of course, there's location-neutral businesses. And one of the reasons why people live on the western slope of Colorado is because, I mean, look around you, right? So it's the rafting, it's the hiking, it's the mountain biking, it's the skiing. It's just the beauty of where we live. And so it's a lifestyle choice to be here. And there are a lot of people today who work for large corporations who don't have to be tied down to an office location. So as long as they have access to an airport, they can live wherever they want. Typically those people earn over, they're 6-figure-a-year earners. Their money isn't made here, it's made somewhere else, but they're spending their money in your community. Their contribution to their local community is as great or greater than any other industry sector. But nobody knows about them, right? Because they're quietly living in communities, and unless they're part of charitable organizations or some other organization that has some visibility, you're not really going to know who they are and why they're there. If you want to attract more location-neutral employees to your part of Colorado, then you better have the infrastructure to support that. You go north of here about 4 hours, and there's a community called Marble, Colorado. They have nothing. So right now, teachers in the Marble School District have to drive 30 miles one way to upload anything that they're required to upload on the internet. Now next year, the state of Colorado will be required, all the school districts within the state of Colorado will be required to take PARC tests. And PARC is a national educational program where students take tests to see how they're compared with their peers. But what they're doing with the PARC, they're saying is if you don't pass these tests, you don't move on to the next grade. So they're really important. If you look at for example, the safety implications of busing kids to the nearest town so that they can do whatever it is, take these tests. Yeah. Right? What's the safety factor?
What does that do to the kids' test performance if they're...
Well, that too. If you have a town of 200 or 300 people, right, who's going to make a business case for that? You could probably find this case across the West.
My hosts in Pagosa Springs put me in touch with a local high school. When I tried to leave town the next day, I got 24 miles before my host caught up with me in his truck. He said he'd talked with the school's wilderness survival teacher, and they agreed I seemed unprepared and unmotivated. He also said I reminded him of his son. The temperature dropped to -20 Fahrenheit. I needed to get to Santa Fe and the Rio Grande before the next storm blew in. Police pulled me over for looking suspicious. Rio Grande.
My name is Aaron Vigil. I'm the shift manager here at the Nambe Falls Travel Center. It's on the Nambe Pueblo Reservation, owned by the Nambe tribe themselves. We're responsible for the operation of the satellite postal service that we have here. We intake all the mail for packages or postal itself, and the federal government comes and picks them up and sends them to the federal post office.
How did you get involved doing this here?
The tribe actually asked for the permission to go ahead and do that as a courtesy. Being that tribes are federal, they're allowed to go ahead and do so on Indian reservations.
Is there anything that ever makes the mail through here like difficult? Are there ever problems that come up with it?
There's a lot of problems that come with it because of the regulations and stuff for shipping makes a big difference. So a lot of these packages, when we suspect there's something in the inside, we actually have the customer open it. There are a few instances where customers don't want to open up their packages, so we don't accept them.
Despite having a lot of mesh open on the tent during the night, once again my breath is condensed all over the inside of this thing and then frozen. So now that I'm trying to get packed up, every time I move, a little bit more ice falls down and immediately starts melting over whatever it touches, which is mostly the sleeping bag, given how big the sleeping bag is. So the sleeping bag is going to get stored wet. All the other bedding is going to get stored wet. The inside of the tent's going to get wet. Tonight, when I unpack everything, everything's going to be wet. It's going to be cold again tonight. My breath is going to condense and freeze again tonight. Everything's just going to keep getting wetter until I can finally get indoors and spread everything out to dry. And I don't know when that's going to be. The night before last, I was camped on a slope, went kind of far down at the toes. I was doing this upward shimmy all night. And then last night, I wound up camping in a kind of fold in a small dry stream bed. And for some reason, I actually had a dream of intense vertigo. I've never had actual vertigo. But in the dream, I was perched up on top of this tall stone spire, and everything below me was swimming in this kind of pendulous way, backward and forward and side to side. And then that was succeeded by a dream in which I was accosted by a Brazilian or possibly Burundian weasel dog. And I can still see its snapping teeth and its soulful eyes. At any rate, I'm really looking forward to taking a shower and sleeping on something flat.
This hospital is small, it's limited in their capability. They don't have specialists, they don't have cardiologists, they don't have neurologists. So if a patient comes in with a stroke or a heart attack and they need a specialty care, those patients have to go to Phoenix or Albuquerque, El Paso, where they have those specialties. Having the helicopter right here, we can put the patient in and have the patient to Las Cruces, say in 30 minutes, where by ground it would take an hour.
When did the helicopter get here? When did that become
Been here just over 2 years.
This aircraft we're flying, the Goose 119, it doesn't do very well in hot temperatures. Every aircraft is going to do worse in hot and humid conditions, but
why is that?
It's the density of the air. It produces less lift, so you have to basically take weight off of the aircraft to make it still do the same performance.
Is that like fuel?
Yeah, that's really what the only thing we can take off. And how heavy of a passenger can we take?
We took a 400-pound patient one day, but then I've also seen days when it was really hot that we got told that we couldn't take more than a 100-pound patient.
From getting the call through making decisions and grabbing the gear and getting to the helicopter, how long does it take to be in the air?
They light us in the air in 15 minutes.
And there's other factors like there's a big military restricted area to the east of here. Before you just go flying through there, you got to check with somebody, and that can take some time.
They shoot missiles from Nevada and they hit here, or they shoot missiles from here to Nevada. So you don't want to be cruising through there and have a missile take you out.
Yeah. What kind of cost is associated with a flight?
But I've been told a basic flight with not a whole lot of stuff going on is around $20,000 to $22,000 from here to say El Paso.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a 40-minute flight. But I think flying over you can really see the distances,
Oh look, there's a light out there. I wonder what that is. Because it's the only light that you can see for 100 miles in any direction.
I mean, you could imagine 200 years ago when like Billy the Kid's out running around on his horse and stuff, because not really that much has changed.
No.
I mean, you've got towns that have grown up a little bit, but I mean, 5 minutes you're out of the town, and it's just like it was when, everybody was riding around on horses and the Indians were running around.
My family moved to this part of the country in 1906.
Yeah.
My grandfather moved to Denver in 1906. He was a baby. But he lived here before New Mexico was even a state. And that, you talk about things that are significant in my job. I've always liked transporting old people. Like these 80, 90-year-old people, because if they're not really that sick and you can get them talking about their history of moving here, they've got to see all of this stuff in their lifetime. They've got to see the going from riding around in a wagon to automobiles and planes and the jet age and seeing people land on the moon and all this stuff. You want to find out like the history of travel, man, they've got to see it all.
Over some cake in the kitchen, the helicopter mechanic told me about the time he was almost eaten by a werewolf in Portugal. A couple of days later, the evening news out of Albuquerque included a note that the station had just gotten its own helicopter back in the air after someone riddled it with a shotgun. And that's how we rang in the new year.
I've been saying during the whole course of the trip that I've been traveling from Seattle to El Paso. It doesn't feel like I'm on my last night before arriving at my long-sought destination. This just feels like another night on the road. I don't think I'll be in a state of mind to call the trip done when I get to El Paso. The question is, how do I push on from there?
By this point, I was limping badly enough that my shoes were wearing out at different rates. And suddenly, it could all be over. After all of the pain and the uncertainty and the anxiety and the stress, and at some points genuine desperation, it was all coming to an end too soon. I hadn't walked through all of that for this.
So my name is Guillermina Gina Nunez Mshiri. I'm an anthropologist. I've written about processes of entrapment and how people who are in the different stages of their documentation process to become U.S. residents and U.S. citizens become entrapped. I would argue that after 9/11, human mobility in the United States has been severely affected by massive militarization of the border. In the past, people who were migrants, people would come and work in the United States, would go home for winter to spend Christmas and New Year's with their family, and then come spring they would come back. If you don't have papers, it's going to cost you $2,000 to $3,000 to pay a coyote to smuggle you back in. And cartels are very much part of that too, because it's a different source of income. If you're female, you're probably looking at potential rape. So because it's so much harder to cross the border and come work here without papers, people have not left. So all over the U.S., you have approximately 11 million people without papers, without legal authorization to live and work here.
People think it's only one direction coming through El Paso, but it's kind of both directions. Many people come here so that they can have like a transnational kind of homelessness. It's very cheap to be homeless in El Paso and be able to just cross the border and get a a rundown room, a very cheap room, just kind of bounce back and forth in a given day or a given week or whatever.
And they're coming in some cases from very far away?
They're going from LA to Austin or Florida or wherever, or vice versa, going from the east out to LA or San Diego.
Does it tend to be a lot of east-west travel sort of along the border that way?
What I see with homeless people especially, yes. But it's a hub in all sorts of directions, I guess is what I was trying to say before too, is people are going from the US into Mexico, people are going from Mexico into the US, people are going from the west to the east and east to the west and just stopping along the way. It's very ideal for a sociologist to study transient people.
On the highways you meet all kinds of people. The most enigmatic, for me, had been truckers. On foot you don't see the person at the wheel so much as the machine. El Paso is one of the biggest trucking centers in the United States. If I wanted to meet my opposite number, I was in the right place.
My name is Eugene Wyatt, and I started driving 18-wheeler trucks in the beginning in 1968 in California. From there I got laid off when wintertime come because I was hauling asphalt. I come to El Paso. We covered the 6 southwestern states, hauled a variety of petroleum products and agricultural chemicals, hauled asphalt, acid, fuel, jet fuel, anhydrous ammonia. That company went bankrupt, and I went to work for Groendyke Transport, which is another larger tank line, operates out of Oklahoma. Then I got cross-threaded with the manager of Groendyke. One day I took a load of fuel to a local flatbed trucking company. By the time I left, I was working for the flatbed trucking company. But it was not a good company to work for. Roadrunner was a good company. And I worked for them for 7 years. Part of the time I worked there, I went long haul for about a year and covered 48 states.
Is there a lot of talk amongst the people who work as drivers about how different companies operate?
Oh yeah. The bigger the company, usually the better it is to work for. There are some big companies that mostly want owner-operators, and there's even some that mostly want husband-wife teams are more reliable.
One of the things that people ask me a lot is, do I listen to music while I'm walking?
24/7.
And what do I think about?
Winning the lottery. Everybody has a CB, and some truckers prefer just to talk to each other constantly. And those talking books, that's fairly common.
Where are some of the good stations?
There's one in Phoenix that's terrific. Michael Bolton, that type of music. ABBA, Fernando.
Yeah.
I first heard it on that station in Phoenix.
Before you started driving professionally, had you seen a lot of the country?
I grew up in Montana, and I joined the carnival there and followed it and went to Canada and around Montana and Utah and down to Phoenix, and I hitchhiked home. And then another year, I was a bum, so I caught a freight train in Montana, rode it back to Phoenix. Enjoyed the carnival, the same carnival, but this time followed it north. And my very first experience ever was with this guy that we came to Phoenix during the carnival. The time we came from Montana the first time, it was snowing and blowing, about 20 below, and there was no empty boxcar, so we rode on the outside of a tank car into the night for 2 or 3, 4 hours, hanging on. There's a railing goes all the way around tank cars, hanging on like that. And you'd think you'd fall off, but you don't. Your arms never let go even when you're asleep. And finally the train stopped somewhere in some town up in the mountains in Utah, and we had a hell of a time letting go, trying to make our arms work, climbing down, legs won't work. And here come this guy, a brakeman, checking in the brakes. And we talked to him if he had any empty boxcars at all. And he said they didn't, but he said, I'll tell you what, you got to promise me you're not going to touch anything. Go up and get in the rear engine, climb up in the rear engine, nice and warm. So we rode into Salt Lake in style.
When you were first starting to travel these long distances, were there places that when you saw them for the first time, they made a really big impression on
The
you?
Mississippi River. That's my first great experience in the type you're talking about, and I was just enthralled. You've never done it before. It's a memorable event. Some of the most vicious roads are the most interesting. There's one out of Cortez, Colorado, where we were hauling asphalt for about 3 or 4 months, and you went down one hill sharp curves, cross the bridge, go up another hill sharp curve, and there's no way you can make good time, but it's interesting.
What's the common duration of a run in something like this?
There's no such thing. When I was driving, you were allowed to work 60 hours a week. That could be in 7 days or 5 days, or it might even be 3 days. But when that was, then you're supposed to wait until you had hours again. Roadrunner trucking in our terminal did not run legally, in the sense that they would load you and you had to deliver the next day in California. You can't deliver, you can't go from El Paso to Los Angeles legally without stopping. But we did every time. So we kept 2 logbooks. You'd go to the river, Ehrenberg, Arizona, truck stop, pull in their change logbooks, make sure that when you're starting it had the right numbers and the right load numbers, and take off and go to LA. But then in LA, it would take all day to unload and reload, and by that time, both your logbooks were caught up.
Yeah.
But you hadn't any sleep. You're supposed to come on back home.
What are the ways that you cope with that?
Well, I coped with it by having an accident cost me my leg. I fell asleep, ran in the back of another truck on a hill. I was in really bad shape. My legs were this, and the bones were all hanging out, and they tried to put it back together, and they finally got it back together, but they couldn't make the knee work. I've had more than 20 operations. I don't know exactly. But finally, they got me back together enough that they were done operating. So then for 7 years, I stayed drunk, because all of a sudden I wasn't the same me, and I wasn't happy with it. And then I realized that I can't do this. There's no future. I'm going to kill myself, among other things. I was still good from here up. And I had went to a college in Montana 1 semester one time. Got 3 A's and a B. So I thought it was fun. So I decided to enroll at UTEP. So anyway, I graduated, and I looked around to see what kind of work I could do. I decided to join UTEP's alternative certification program where I could teach. You have to find your own first job, and if you work for a year, then they make you a certified teacher. But they wouldn't me, probably in combination my age and disability. So I went back after 2 years and got a master's degree, but I still can't find a job. I've written a 400-page book, and I'm trying to get it published.
What's the title?
Until You Get It Right, The 70-Year Odyssey of a Square Peg. But I still dream about trucking.
What were some of the best things about it?
Well, seeing the country, sitting up high. And one time in Phoenix, I was on a city street off to going somewhere, and I remember pulling up behind his car, a man and his wife full of kids, and it was night, and my lights obviously were blinding him, so I pulled up behind, I turned the lights off, and he waved to me. See, so that made me feel good.
El Paso isn't enough, so I'm going to New Orleans. It's the 2nd week in January. If I walk faster for longer than I've ever walked in my life, I might just get there by March 4th. Word is they're planning a party.
This is the most dangerous road I've been on this entire trip. I just wiped out on the ice. Coming down the hill, lost control of the cart. Skidded down the road for a bit behind it with it dragging me, and chewed up my hip a little bit. And yesterday, took enough out of me that my left leg actually it's got a little sewing machine action going first thing in the morning.
I ran into multiple right-wing militant enclaves in the course of this walk. You see white supremacist flags. You see flyers in bars. You see posters, slogans, weapons. We'd already been through the federal government shutdown that fall. One man running a roadside apple stand told me it was prophesied Obama's foreign policy would cause an earthquake that would physically fracture the United States and cause a nuclear catastrophe, so he was stockpiling guns and ammunition so that when the fighting started, he'd be ready. He went red in the face telling me how angry he was that the president was black. Then he went to show some other customers the llamas in his petting zoo.
Sometimes people will ask me what I'm learning through traveling like this. And if I had to say what things seem to be building up to right now as a lesson, I would say that in the United States there will be a civil war soon. Welcome to the Great Plains.
The baseline here is desolation. In this part of the high plains, there's hardly any water, hardly anything can grow, and the temperature fluctuations are extreme. Hundreds of years ago, the Comanches used it as a staging ground for slave raids. Then it turned into cattle drive country for a decade or so, until conditions on the plains killed so many cattle that the industry collapsed. Now it's oil and gas. Never mind that burning fossil fuels drives global warming. Never mind fracking has made the groundwater too poisonous to drink. Never mind the spills, the leaks, the noxious evaporation ponds, and the pervasive corporate secrecy. If it's a wasteland to start with, nobody cares what becomes of it. You couldn't do this to a place you cared about.
H2S, it's very dangerous in that area, so if you get into a strong enough area of H2S there, you wouldn't even know it, you'd just be out. Walking through that area without a detector, that's probably not the best of ideas. I mean, I've actually had deputies go down on me before just because they were in that area. It's some dangerous stuff.
Hydrogen sulfide is a weapons-grade nerve gas. Throughout oil and gas country, it leaks out of the wells and the storage tanks and collects in low-lying areas. In extremely low concentrations, the air smells like it's turning into chicken soup. Any higher concentration, and the gas kills your sense of smell entirely, knocks you out, and kills you. If you're unlucky, it does all of this in one breath. In the Permian Basin, this risk is normal. It's too dangerous to sleep on the ground, and it's virtually impossible to walk across the Permian Basin without doing that. In order to bypass the main oil and gas fields, I detoured 100 miles south, bumping the distance still between me and New Orleans back over 1,000 miles.
It's always a magical feeling on a partially cloudy day when a ray of sunlight suddenly sweeps over. Sometimes it really is just the simple things. Wes English handed me $20 in case I needed a hot meal at some point. He pointed out that the temperatures tonight are supposed to drop pretty low, and that if I were trying to get out of it, the only place this side of Pecos is, here pointed to the map, a little place called Mentone, which is off the road eastward. And I thought, Mentone, aha, I remember that name. If memory serves, that is the only settlement in the least densely populated county in the United States outside of Alaska.
There's a moment just as something goes wrong when you don't have time to react, but you're intensely aware of the bad thing happening.
Ow!
The thorn had punched most of the way through the ball joint of my left big toe. My foot swelled so badly that I could barely put my shoe back on after swabbing the wound. The Pecos Christian Home gave me a bed and a blanket and time to get started on the antibiotics. My roommate and the home's caretaker was a former cowboy and migrant farmhand who had made the 6-day crossing through the desert from Chihuahua many times, traveling on foot and in secret with hardly any food or water. A horse almost kicked him to death on one job, and then he had a stroke while he was working in Pecos and couldn't keep going. In the evenings when he came up the stairs, he sank on his bed by the door, gasping. One time, on his way past me out of the room, he said, "I got nobody." He planted the trees in the yard of his own accord. The days went by. The swelling and the pain went down.
I don't know what it is, but you cannot beat people in West Texas for hospitality and generosity. I've made hardly any distance so far today, and I've had so many people stopping to see if I need help, and first it was, "You need a bottle of water?" Then it was, "Here, take these 2 enormous discs of peanut brittle." Then it was, "Hey, how about lunch? I've got sandwiches and bags of chips and cookies." Then it was, "Hey, I'm heading back into town and I've got this huge box of salad." Salad! On top of all the people I met in Pecos, who were really wonderful, helping me get through some unforeseen awkwardnesses. Oh, I have a lot to be thankful for.
I had 33 days to walk at least 900 miles. By day, the temperatures were in the 80s. By night, they were in the teens. At least that's how it started. Gradually, the cold just stayed. All my food froze. My water froze. In the occasional crossroads buildings, the pipes froze. And still you could smell the poison gas any time you were near a tank or a truck or a well. One night the hydrogen sulfide woke me up, and I thought, what do I do now? Run?
It's a really strange thing. I've been looking forward to seeing green leaves on trees for a long time now. And suddenly this is it. Yesterday I was out and it's just dead. Everything was dead. And now suddenly all the trees have leaves on them from one day to the next. It's still solidly below freezing. It's been solidly below freezing for a few days now, straight. It's supposed to start picking back up at around 11 this morning. I can't tell if I'm tearing up because of the trees or just because it's cold. The Department of Transportation actually has a guy drive out along the highway in a pickup, pitchforking the dead animals off on the side of the road. That was Greg Hindy. He's walking from New Hampshire to California via Oregon. He estimates the whole thing will add up to 8,000 miles, and right now he's on about mile 5,000.
On February 12th, I reached Austin. I was out of the desert. The cold had passed. I still had 550 miles to go. On the way out of town, a homeless man waved at me below an overpass. It felt like a smile from a friend. Silver Wings Ballroom. Skating. Dancing. Midget wrestling. Cowboy church.
As I get into well-watered country at last, the bridges don't tend to have shoulders, and the bigger the river, the more likely the bridge will be arched to such an extent that I can't see what traffic is coming on the other side, so I can't really walk safely into traffic. But say behind me, there's also a sharp curve, so I can't see what's coming behind me. Kroger's in Conroe. I got some apple juice and some rice pudding and some granola and some chocolate chips. Rang it up the self-checkout station. On my way out the door, as I threw the receipt in the trash and some of the packaging, one of the cashiers said, "I think he's stealing," so they sent security out after me, and he had me rummage in the trash for the receipt, and then he went down the list and checked every item one by one against the contents of my cart to make sure that I wasn't in fact stealing, and that's the last time I'm shopping at a Kroger's. My left knee has had all it can take. It was starting to send me really strange signals. On the way into Batson, and now, I'm really not sure what it's going to be doing in the morning. And I think it's lightning right now, actually, that's flashing. If it is lightning, it's far enough away that I can't hear the thunder. But I'm finding it kind of disorienting. It's not the pain that I mind, it's the damage.
A woman at a supermarket asked me if I had been raped. A preacher invited me to his taxidermy shop and then told me I was going to hell for my sins, surrounded by staring severed heads. I felt like I'd been out of the West for a while by this point. But if any unmistakable sign had been waiting, if any boundary remained to be crossed, this was it. The Mississippi's come a long way, but not as far as me. The output of the High Plains oil and gas fields also descends to the Gulf Coast. On reaching the outskirts of Baton Rouge at sunset, I took a picture of ExxonMobil's enormous town welcome sign and was immediately surrounded by armed police and corporate guards. They interrogated me on the side of the road, took my ID, and told me the terrorist threat was elevated after 9/11. I was worried. I was anxious for my camera, and I had other anxieties as well. I hadn't found a single place to pee since I started walking that morning. I decided I shouldn't tell them I'd spent the night sleeping next to a nuclear power plant. When they finally let me go, they told me to be careful because it was a dangerous neighborhood. And they were right. Of all the places I've traveled, Baton Rouge is the only one so far where I've been surrounded by hostile armed men. In Baton Rouge, people in black neighborhoods stared at me because I was white, and people in white neighborhoods stared at me because I was homeless. The only people who seemed to think I looked normal were the ornithologists who put me up for the night, and they work in the Amazon. They told me there was really only one thing I needed to do to blend in.
"15 miles into the heart of the city today, which should make this the last day of the trip on the road proper. I've managed to strain both calves, basically while lying down in the tent. That's obviously not what set me up for the trouble, but along with some blisters on my left foot, I'm probably not going to cover these 15 miles in record time. Still, at least the wind isn't coming directly toward me, and at least for a moment the rain has let up. Only the tent got thoroughly wet. Everything else seems to have stayed dry through the night. Got the Mississippi barges on my right. It is cool to see the big ships all pulled up in the river, riding really high. Names like Sea Venus and Orient Dispatch. Oh. It makes one think of the thrill of travel. I wonder what it's like to go to faraway places.
I figured I'd have one last bridge to deal with to reach the city. The last stretch had no shoulder. I just ran for it. And I got there.